Generational Wealth Podcast, and this is episode number 107. I am your host, Amir Estimo. Thank you for tuning in to today's podcast episode. I know it's been a while. Your boy's been on a hiatus since I've recorded a podcast episode. Since I would say my last episode was back in March 29. I mean, not 29, but like March 29, 2023. That's the last time I recorded an episode. But ever since then, I've just been on a hiatus, just trying to regroup things and, just to kind of give you retrospect. But first, I like to say, wherever you at, bon dia, buenos dias, all right, bonjour, okay, so salut, anything you can think of. So wherever you at right now, just to kind of open that up. So first of all, I always like to open up each podcast episode with thanks and appreciation, gratitude and appreciation. I'm very grateful for you taking the time to listen to this podcast. Even through the hiatus, the podcast is actually still getting downloads, still averaging a decent amount of downloads every single week. So for the podcast, for a podcast that's used to probably getting, let's say, 1,000 episodes per drop, whereas this podcast doesn't get that. I probably get less than 10% of that. So, but I'm appreciative. Whoever listens to this podcast, it's not about this podcast is not about 100,000 downloads. This podcast is about information. Now, could it get to that point? Yes, but right now it's about information, especially with today's topic. So, with today's podcast episode, we're going to talk about, again, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this podcast episode because you could be doing anything in the world. But the fact that you're listening to this podcast, it's much appreciated. So today's podcast, we're going to talk about the student loan debt crisis in America. Now, as a lot of you are quite cognizant of, the student loan pause will be ending as of August 31st, 2023. Back in June, I think Biden signed something to where there would be no more pause on the student loans. It's time for buyers to pay up. So now your student loans the pause will end August 31st. Interest will begin occurring beginning September 1st. And first payment probably won't be until October. So even with that being said, you get the pause, but then interest starts to build up beginning September 1st, which is one of the main issues with the student loan, which didn't address anything. Through all this pause and all of this stuff, we went through 3 years. COVID, post-COVID, even pre-COVID, the same issue still resides. And it's probably even worse now. So we're going to talk about that a little bit here. So if you are going through the same thing, like me, who's someone who owes student loan, hey, this is part of the podcast episode for you, okay? First of all, podcast episode is brought to you by American Financial. American Financial is the podcast, is the sponsor of this podcast. And in this American Financial, our goal is to educate, eradicate debt. So we want to build assets. We want to talk about educating ourselves to leave generational wealth, okay? And to do so, we want to be financially independent and financially free. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you with the history of all that with student loan. You can look that in. But I'll give you a short little timeline of it. So in 1958, so there was actually, in 1958, there was the National Defense Education Act. And what that was because the Soviet Union launched a satellite called the Sputnik, and the NDA wanted to enact a program of education in science, mathematics, and foreign languages. And then this also included the first federal loan program for college students, providing low interest rates to students pursuing higher education. Okay, and in 1965, you had the landmark legislation established where the federal government got involved in the higher education, comprehensive framework for federal involvement in higher education. So it aimed to make college more accessible by providing financial aid to low-income families through federal Perkins Loan Program and also Basic Educational Opportunity Grant. known later on as Pell Grant. So that was the Higher Education Act of 1965. And then the Guaranteed Student Loan Program enacted also in 1965, and under the Higher Education Act, it was allowing private lenders to offer federally guaranteed loans to students. So this ensured that the government's repayment of these loans if the borrower defaulted. Okay. Then in then in 1978, the Middle Income Student Assistance Act, which is this is basically for middle income family who's struggling to pay for colleges, right? So this was also extended to them in 19 other basically other forms of financial aid was extended to them, which then introduced the Federal Family Education Loan Program, which offered subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So if you guys kind of have an idea, so if you want to look into that, like the subsidized, unsubsidized loans, I'm not going to get too much into that. You can always look that up. The Higher Education Amendments in 1992, which significantly overhauled federal student loan programs. It was replaced with what was called the FFEL program, Direct Loan Program, shifting responsibility of the originating loans from private lenders to the Department of Education. And then ensuring the continued access to Student Loans Act that came in act in 2008, which was a response to the global pandemic. Not pandemic, but that's when we had the I can't think of the word right now, but when we were in when we were in recession. That's recession. Sorry. So that enacted in 2008. So that basically started up then. Then in College Cost Reduction Act, this legislation was made in 2007, and this was basically for Pell Grant, and this was introduced to income-driven repayment plan. So this was a public service loan program. So basically, like you went to teacher and you went to school to become a teacher or something to that nature, your loans would be forgiven after a certain amount of time. Then, then the College Cost Reduction and Access Act, which we talked about, and then now the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act. So I couldn't speak there. As part of a broader healthcare reform, eliminates subsidies to private lenders originating through the FFEL program, making the direct loan program the sole provider of student loan program. Okay, so that's just a kind of a breakdown of the timeline of the student loan and different acts that came about since let's talk about 1958. Okay, now from my perspective, okay, so that's that, right? So from my perspective, if you don't live in the U.S., this is basically here's the gist of it. So in the U.S., you go up to 12th grade here. So you go from first, you can say kindergarten to 12th grade. In some cases, pre-K to 12th grade, depending, right? And then as you graduate your senior year, you decide to go to college. But not everybody is capable of going to college because college is very expensive. Remember, I went to the University of South Florida, and I say in-state tuition was like almost 10,000, maybe 15,000 per semester. So considering the fact per semester, meaning that if you went to school from August to December, that's a semester. January to April, May, whatever, that's a semester, and you have to pay $10,000 to $15,000 per semester. Now, if you're going part time, that was cheaper, but the issue there is you don't get as much student loans when it comes to going to school part time. So you basically have to be a full time student, which is 12 credit hours or more, to be considered for student loans or for aid or grants, whatever. So that's the aspect, and you generally go to college from that point anywhere between 4 to 5 or 4 to 6 years, and then depending on whatever your major you're studying in, and then you go to your master's afterwards and your doctorate. So it's called continuing education. So in that retrospect, that's basically the gist of it. But the issue here, though, is if you're someone or your family's not capable of sending you to college, so you apply for student loans, and or you apply for basically financial aid, and then whatever you qualify, you may get more. It may be a mixture of you getting grants and you getting loans at the same time to to fund your education. And upon graduation, usually about 6 months after that, you're expected to make your first payment. And I'm talking about college. As long as if you're not if you're not pursuing a higher education, then what happens is, meaning that you go to a master's, go to your doctor's, meaning that then, in the retrospect, you would have to start paying your student loans because you're no longer continuing education, right? And that within itself becomes more expensive. Master's master's program, doctor's program, and whatnot, right? So that's to give you a gist of it, to give you a breakdown, not like the political you may see verbiage that's used. This is just basically my experience with it. And I was someone that, to be honest with you, I was in college for 7 years. And the reason is 5 of those years, I would say probably the last 2 years of college, I went more than I needed to because I was mentally checked out. And I think my confidence got shattered a little bit when I took a course and in the course I failed it. And then I had to wait another year basically take that course, which pushed me back another year to graduate. And I was just like, at this point, I was just like, this is kind of pointless. So I myself have student loan debt, and it's basically five-figure debt. Is it one of the high? No, I'd probably say high tier. It would be mid, before the six-figure, mid 50, not 50, but like mid five-figure uh, debt, somewhere around there. Some cases you hear people owing six figures in student loan debt, right? And if you're someone who don't come from a family that's wealthy or has any kind of type of money, it's very hard for you to fund your education. So you have no choice but to take whether the grants or student loans. And me coming from a Haitian descendant background, it's not like my parents were blessed or whatever with a whole bunch of money. When they came here, all they knew how to do was come here and work, work, work. That's all they ended up doing here. So the situation was that when I went off to college, yeah, you had to apply for student loans, and it was kind of a no choice. But if I had to look back, certain things I would have did different with it is even if I had got the student loans, I probably should have started a business. Look at doing some type of, because that's when the internet. We're talking early 2000s, where the internet was still a thing. It was not like what it is today, but it was just still growing. It was in infancy, right? And if I had figured that out by then, because the reason I'm saying this is because there's certain books I've listened to, and you're hearing how these people, some people, why they were in college, they started a business. And if I was smart enough, if I had that thought process back then guess what? I wouldn't need to take out student loan. I would have graduated college, probably had my school paid for, and then had a business that was flourishing right afterwards. So, but you know what? You can't be living in the past. Those decisions are already made. You just gotta keep it up and keep moving, right? So what it is now is fast forward. We hit probably about 2019, beginning 2020, somewhere around there. The student loan gets a pause, right? So what's really hurt, like for me, I'm one of the people, I don't mind paying my student loan back. What I have an issue is the interest, because there's an interest that I remember one year, I can't remember the year, but I paid like $5,000 and only went like 500 to the principal, which is disheartening because you're paying 500, you pay 5,000, you only made $500 dent, which is 10%. That was it. So if you owe like 60,000, you still owe 55,500, which was just, it was just mind boggling. And now that we're about to deal with that same issue again, and which is where the reason why people can't pay their student loans is because the continually occurred interest. So if you not wealthy or you don't have the funds or the access to go, you decide to go to college because most of us culture wise, outside probably in America, we're all taught to go, you gotta go to college and become something, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, tech, whatever. But some of us don't have the capability, and that's what I was in. I didn't have the capability. I didn't have my parents have money and stuff, so I had to take out student loans. And I went and studied a very difficult degree, which is engineering. But I can say this: the funny thing is all that stuff I learned in college actually applying it in the real world, and I'm making more money, right? And I'm using the stuff I learned in college, but it could have been an easier route for me. It could have been instead of let's say the business thing, right? It could have been I went to community school and taking most of easy core classes. I mean, not a core class, but your easier prerequisites. Knock those out, and then went to college and actually take the courses you need to graduate. So you really there for 4 years. You're there for that college for 2 years. But I was so enamored of the college experience, just being able to be just a college student, and it was just a different experience. But after a while, it was just like you gotta stop playing around and you gotta get serious about this because this was getting serious. And to think about it, now that I'm recording this episode, to think about that, how things changed for me when I went from college, and then just to see that even though I don't have a degree, but I went and built up certain skill sets. I went into tech, and I'm still making the same amount of money that I would have made if I got went to college, right? And went to college, graduated and got my degree. So I actually walked, and I did that thinking about that now because I didn't want to disappoint my parents. And my parents were, hey, graduate, whatever. You know, you're the first person to graduate, but to see that now I'm here in this position, it's like I could have probably never went to college and still got in this situation. Okay, and I'm not saying no one should, but what I'm saying is the paths could have been different. Now you always think of these what ifs. What if I had just did that, started a business with my financial aid money? Who's to say right now I would have been worth like $10 billion or something, $100 million or something like that? And sometimes it's all about just the education. That's what we're going to talk about is the education. And when you're educated and you have the mindset and these things that come to fruition, or fruition, then you would have a different thought process. And I think that's where looking back at my life now when it comes to the student loan issue, is that what could have I done differently? And probably a lot of us have asked ourselves that question, right? So, so we talk about the cost of education is getting higher, right? So now we just dealt with a pandemic, global pandemic, and now it's time to pay. It's time to pay up, right? So a lot of things went up now. Gas is up, food is up, all that is up. Inflation is up, but the income is still staying the same, and that's where you get the issue with, when it comes to the student loan, is that I can handle. I can if I'm going to be paying all this money, please stop with the interest. That's killing me, right? Because the interest is what's hurting. Is you're not putting much debt into the principal. And then on top of that, you're looking at this now is it's like, okay, I'm paying, it's not going down. So what do I do? So cost of education has went up. It's extremely expensive. I actually was talking to a mother and a daughter about a few months ago. I was out and about, and they were discussing about how the mother, the mother sent the younger one of her younger kids to college. It was cost 75,000. It was not even for a private institution. It was for a public institution. 75,000. So if you break that out, that's like 30 $37,500 per semester. That is extremely ridiculous. I have a 16-year-old which wants to go to college, and it's going to be tough. Not saying we can't do it, but it's going to be tough because it's so expensive. And then she's like, she wants to go out of state. Which, at first when she mentioned that, I was like, it's going to be tough for you. But now that I think about it, it could be the best thing for her too. because you want your kid to. For me, is even though I didn't leave the state of Florida, I left the city I was at, and I was actually happy that I did that. I made that decision because a lot of my friends ended up getting into a lot of stuff they shouldn't have gotten into. And who's to say if I didn't fall into that same trap? Versus me going off to college, going off to another city, it actually helped me grow. Now the downside about that is when you start having the first sign of trouble financially, then you're calling your parents. And that's where I'm kind of in between a rock and a hard place. I would love for her to stay, but I would love for her to grow too. So it's going to be up to her, her decision. But when that time comes, we got to look at all alternatives because college is extremely expensive. Extremely expensive. 75,000 for a whole year for a public university. I'm not even talking about a private institution. So you think about it. Now, let's say your family you can't even afford that. You go and take a. Do you want to take out student loans? You're probably not. So what happens is now is you don't even go that route. You know, when I was growing up before college, it was only basically college. Now it's like there's so many other opportunities. You don't have to just send your kid off to college or anything to that nature. Unless it's like you're going to study engineering, lawyer, or doctor, or something to that nature. There's some of that stuff you don't need to waste time going to college. Even IT, there's IT schools that there's self-taught courses you can take, and you can get into the IT industry that way. So I think the mindset from where back then and now is so much different. If I was going to college now, I would be, no, I probably wouldn't waste time going into university. I probably wouldn't. Unless you really feel like graduating and all that is important to you, then you can do that. But however, I don't think it is. That's my opinion, though, right? So you look at the economic. If you're someone who's not capable, and who's that really impacting? Low income, generally African American, Black Americans, Hispanics. Those are the ones who are struggling to send their kid off to college. They don't have the means, you can't afford it, right? So what happens now is sometimes you have these kids who could have gone off to college, could have done something, probably don't even have the right leadership, and they're off in the streets doing whatever, doing committing crime, and now they're locked into society. It becomes a society of madness. So we have to think about that when it comes to the student loan. What can we do to help correct this? So now Biden actually had a plan, and it was shot down by the Supreme Court to basically, if you made a certain amount of money, you would have gotten 20,000 of your loan forgiven. If you made, I think it was another set of money, you got 10,000. That was shot down by the Supreme Court, where they voted. I think it was a panel was 9, and they got shut down 6-3. Right? So can we say, well, can we really count on the government? No, because to go to show you, the president didn't even have that much power. I mean, the fact that the president of America couldn't even get this passed is sad. It's sad. So we are now in a position where we can't just sit here and be, what am I going to do? What is this? We got to start taking it into our own hands. And that's what I'm going to share with you. 8 tips. Okay, so 8 tips. So number one, we're going to educate ourselves. That's what we're going to do. Understand the terms and conditions of your loan. You know, look at different payment plans, interest rates, right? What are the potential benefits? Forgiveness programs. You know, there's things in here you can like research the government websites, loan services platforms, and then just to know your rights and obligations as a borrower. Start with there. Number two, create a budget. Expose yourself to the numbers. That's what I would say. Take a look at your numbers because your spending habits has changed since before the pre-pandemic. Now, post-pandemic, you're not spending the same because the money that you probably would have put into your student loans, you're probably using it for other stuff, and paying bills, going out, take family traveling, so and so and so on, right? Now you're gonna have to expose yourself to the numbers, and you're gonna have to look at it and say, okay, where am I at now? Where was I, and where am I now currently? What am I going to have to do differently? It could mean maybe now I'm not going out as much. It could mean maybe if you're leasing the vehicle, when your lease is up, you may have to start paying on it. Actually, take out a loan to pay off your car. There's a lot of things now you're gonna have to expose yourself to because your life has changed from before the pandemic to now. It's different. Number three, explore repayment options. I've even thought about this. Maybe see now the kicker is that if you, let's say you refinance out of your student loan, what happens now is, let's say you go to SoFi or something, because I've seen SoFi have been sending some marketing letters to me. If you go to that, what happens now is that you lose the governmental. So like the pause that happened, if you were SoFi, or let's say you use some other company to refinance your student loan, guess what happened? You wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't get those benefits because you are no longer, you are now dealing with a company, a private company, to service your loan, not the government. This is not a governmental loan anymore. So you wouldn't get the pause that you had, right? So maybe you have to look into that now, looking at to refinance your student loans, because I can tell you my student loan interest was 6.75% interest. So which one is it at this point? Do I really want to deal with the daily occurring interest, or just refinance and just don't, you know what, I don't care no more. I'm just going to pay off my student loans because that's what I did. That's what I told myself was, when I graduate, I'm going to pay off my student loan. Obviously, it's not, you're not going to get the help from the government, so you might as well just forget that. So you might, unless you do some like income driven plan. See, that's the thing. If you refinance your student loan, you don't get those options. Those are not available to you anymore. So that's something to really ponder on and pontificate, right? So you think about that. Number four, we talked about refinancing, constant repayment options. So there's different ones. So we have the, you have to look at the IDR, which is the income driven plans. There's different sets of plans for that. So it's based off of your family size, and they give you a student, they give you a payment every single month. Some people end up paying like zero for a whole year, but again, the interest continually piles up. You got to consider it. So it's kind of a gift and a curse type of thing, right? Number five, seek loan forgiveness assistance programs. So maybe you have to do something in the public service sector, right? Maybe look into going into that. And then what happens with that is after 10 years, which is 120 qualifying payments, the rest of your loan is forgiven. So let's say you pay 10 years on your loan and you end up owing like 30,000, or let's say 20, the rest of it's forgiven. So that's maybe something you have to look into. Number six, prioritize your payments. Again, it's going to be, this goes back to point number two, which is budget, right? So maybe you're gonna have to look at paying, look at, you probably incurred some credit card debt. I know I did during this time, these last few months. That's happened to me. So maybe you have to look into now how you're gonna make your payments. If you're someone with multiple student loans, you may have to look at which one is more important. Do I start paying the smaller balance? How do I use the quote unquote Dave Ramsey plan, the snowball effect, or do I use the other one? Snowball, which is usually you just pay off the lowest balance first until you pay everything off. Where you go the other route, where you pay off the high interest rate first, and then you go the other route, right? So those are something you're going to have to look into. Okay. Number seven, seek professional guidance. Look for, have someone, talk to a financial advisor, talk to someone to help steer you in the direction, because things are about to get changed for you. And that's for all of us, for us. Things are about to change for us. And if you're someone that needs that education, reach out to someone, okay? Please don't use YouTube and TikTok. Those are actually, there's information I've got on TikTok, and when I actually professional, I'm like, no, that's not true. And those are not going to be ways to educate yourself. Educate yourself by actually finding someone, a financial provider or financial that can help you put your money in better position. And number eight, which has been difficult for us, which is, I would say, advocate for policy changes. And that hasn't happened, right? But should we stop? Because we still got another generation behind us that's coming. So we got to figure out how to be able to get Congress to listen to us. Yeah, we can complain, shoot TikTok, go on TikTok and complain about the issues, or we got to do something about it. So maybe in situation where you support organizations that are lobbying for student loan reform. So maybe it's good that once you got some people that go on TikTok and they share their stories, and that stuff goes viral, that content goes viral, right? So there's a lot of things you're going to have to understand here now. The changes is about to happen after August 31st. And you want to take those action now. Don't wait later. And even again, there's some things I'm looking into. I'm already looking into maybe repayment option, refinance, consolidating the student loan. Those are things I thought about because how we're going to make it. And if it's something in a situation where I end up losing. I go a route where I just refinance it and just say, what, the heck with it. Let me just go this route. And I just want to pay my student loan. I don't care about government help, all this blah. I just want to pay my student loans off. Okay. So hopefully this helps. This podcast episode helps. And I appreciate, again, you taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. And I'm going to give you a word of the day. Let me leave you with a word of the day. Okay. So it's going to be probably 3 languages because I've been learning French, Portuguese, and Spanish. And of course, I know Haitian Creole. So my goal is really to speak 5 languages. But word de la cabeza. So that's your head. So you gotta use your head in this situation. Okay. So always understand that when it comes to this aspect, we're gonna have to use our head. Okay. All right. Tande. So in Creole, that means listen. Tande. So it's listen. Okay. And let me see. And Brazilian Portuguese is um, how do I say bom dia? So that's good morning, bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, good night, good evening. So again, folks, these we got this, but it's gonna take time and effort. It's gonna take work. So we gotta put in the work. Okay. All right. So thank you for tuning into this podcast episode, and see you next week. Much love. Peace.